Yes! Alright, thanks for watching. Don't forget to slap that like button and punch that bell notification icon to be notified of my future videos. Oh, you actually want to know why? Yeah, I could do that. With Critical Role's Campaign 3 just having ended, the question arises, should they switch to Daggerheart for Campaign 4? And if they do, what would be the consequences and potential backlashes that might arise? Interestingly enough, this wouldn't be their first system change. They actually began as a Pathfinder game. But when they started streaming, Matt Mercer made the smart decision to switch the game over to D&D from Pathfinder. And that's despite D&D just coming out of the travesty that was 4th edition. I mean, it was still the most popular system. It's D&D after all. So they're clearly not averse to switching systems. And now, with their own team developing Daggerheart, the question arises, should they switch to it? And unfortunately, it's not as easy as just saying, ooga booga D&D bad, or hey, we've made a system, let's just use it. No, Critical Role is more than just a game at this point. It's an entire company. Dozens of jobs are tied to their success, so switching systems needs to be approached with a bit of nuance. Now, as I've said before, I think they should switch to Daggerheart. But before I get to my exact reasoning, let me take you into some of the differences between D&D and Daggerheart, just in case you're not familiar or you need some sort of brushing up on it. I mean, they're very similar systems, but there are some big changes. And just as an aside, I'm basing this on the current beta rules for Daggerheart. I've ordered the full thing, but I don't actually have access to them. I've done my best to reach out to those that actually do have access to the full rules, because I do know a few people, but they can't really tell me a whole lot other than they think the rules look good. And I'm also going to take into account the Daggerheart Christmas story, because that was also playing on the full rules, so we can kind of gauge what's changed from the beta rules to the official release. Alright, let's dive in. The first major change is hope and fear. In Daggerheart, checks are made by rolling 2 d12s instead of a d20. One die represents hope, and the other represents fear. You add your modifiers as usual, but the twist is in the outcome. If you roll doubles, even Snake Eyes, congrats, it's a critical success. And there's no critical failure in the system. Instead, the higher of the two dies determines whether you fail or succeed. If hope is higher, the players can use it to enhance abilities, empower others, or in general assist their allies. However, if hope wins, the GM can use it and track it as a resource to later enhance, or rather, scare the players. It's much more of a narrative mechanic between these two than what we have in D&D, perfectly fitting for Critical Role. And while it's not explicitly written in the rules, the Game Master could use the result of hope or fear to directly impact what they're currently rolling for. And honestly, I'm okay bending the rules here because this is Critical Role. Storytelling is everything, and if it enhances the storytelling, I can bet you Matt Mercer's going to do it once or twice at the very least. So let's break it down with an example. We'll start with D&D just to set a baseline, and then move into Daggerheart and how it handles things. A party is trying to get through a locked door. They've checked for traps, but failed their roll. As far as they know, it's safe. But it's not. A hidden tripwire on the door will alert nearby bandits if it's triggered. The rogue thinks it's clear, pulls out their lockpicking tools, and starts working. The DC is 12. They roll just enough to succeed and open the door. However, the tripwire triggers and the bandits are alerted. It's time to roll for initiative. Now let's see how this would play out in Daggerheart. The rogue rolls 2 d12s and beats the DC with hope. And that's where things get interesting. The rogue notices the tripwire at the last second. It hasn't gone off yet, but releasing the lockpicks will trigger it. This gives the party a brief moment to strategize. For this example, let's assume that they figure out that there's bandits that will be alerted, and they use this time to prepare. Now, when the bandits rush in, the party gets a round of opportunity attacks before combat starts. But wait. Do they even roll for initiative in Daggerheart? Nope, and that brings us to our second major change. Daggerheart doesn't use an initiative system. Instead, the players attack whenever and however they want, and the GM tracks when they've attacked and can use that as points to spend towards counterattacking with the enemies. So, back to our example with Hope. The players get a round of attacks off that the GM doesn't track, and then combat begins as normal. Of course, rules as written, Hope and fear are meant to be a resource that both the players and GM can track for later use. But the system allows for more immediate, nuanced results, given whatever the context of the role is. And the book doesn't say anything about not using them like this, so I guess they expect some GMs to play the rules like this. I mean, I certainly will. And this expands the possibilities to 5 distinct outcomes, instead of just the 4 found in D&D, despite there being no critical failure. But what if the party rolled fear instead of hope when trying to lockpick the door? Well, the result will be pretty much identical to how D&D handled it. They lockpick the door, the bandits get alerted, and then the bandits rush in and attack the party. But this is where the third major difference comes into effect: stress. The GM could narrate that the rogue spends several tense minutes struggling with the lockpick, only to be ambushed by the bandits as soon as the door opens. Because of the rogue's prolonged struggle and the outcome, they then take a point of stress. And stress works a little bit like sanity in Call of Cthulhu. Players can take up to 5 points of stress, and then any more above that will directly be deducted from their hit points. And stress also has other effects. If they hit those 5 points, they then become vulnerable. And just like D&D, that means rolls against them are made with advantage. These 3 key differences, hope and fear, the lack of an initiative system, and stress, all work to help enhance the narrative of a game. But for the sake of completeness, there are a few other differences I'd like to mention for Daggerheart. They don't impact the story as much as the previous 3 I just mentioned, but they do impact it a little bit. First, grid-based movement in combat is optional. Instead, the game focuses on keeping all participants equally engaged, assuming everyone is in the same general spot. That said, I have to expect that Matt Mercer is going to adopt a mix of grid-based and non-grid-based movement. After all, we do know how much he loves creating epic battlefields for boss fights. But as it stands right now, there's not much reason to go all out for battle maps in Daggerheart. Though if you really are partial towards grid-based combat, it is an optional rule. The next thing is that players can create a list of thematic experiences that their player has gone through, and these can come with both negative and positive benefits for them. For instance, I might say that I grew up on the streets and learned how to pickpocket at a young age simply for the need to survive. In which case, when I go to pickpockets, I get a +1 to that roll, or something to that effect, whatever the GM decides. And finally, Daggerheart introduces a really neat card system for tracking your abilities. It is probably the single most unique thing that Daggerheart brings to the table. It's just unfortunate that it doesn't offer any real narrative benefits, so I had to exclude it from my previous list. Now, all of these mechanics make Daggerheart a very compelling game to play. However, mechanics alone aren't everything. And Critical Role has more to consider than just what game they're playing. Let's not forget, they're a business. Livelihoods are at stake here. And a move like this isn't just for creative purposes. It's calculated. It's a risk that needs to be assessed. So, while they have a very, very good foundation with Daggerheart, it unfortunately means absolutely nothing if it won't hit their bottom line. And that brings me to my second reason for why I think Critical Role is going to switch to Daggerheart for Campaign 4. The supply chain. You see, Dungeons & Dragons hasn't been without controversy. The most notable example of this was the OGL scandal of 2023, which spurred the creation of many competing systems, likely including Daggerheart. The leaked changes to the OGL suggested that Critical Role would likely owe a significant portion of their revenue to Wizards of the Coast, and for a company of their size, that would have been a nightmare scenario. And then there's the chaos of external factors, like Elon Musk joking about buying Hasbro, the parent company of Wizards of the Coast, in order to undo inclusivity efforts made to D&D. And then suddenly, D&D starts to feel more like a liability than anything for a company that has built themselves upon diversity and inclusion. With Daggerheart, Critical Role would own the entire supply chain. They wouldn't be at risk to changes to the D&D license or unexpected fees. They'd also gain full control over publishing modules without any legal red tape. It's just a series of consecutive wins that not only secures their creative freedom, but their financial future. And I mean, like, from a PR perspective, not adopting your own game is basically like shooting it in the foot before it even has a chance off to the races, but I digress on that front. And then there's the fact that they've got to adapt anyways. D&D 5th edition is no more. We're on to D&D 2024 and beyond. And so if change is inevitable, Why not make the decision that benefits them the most? With Daggerheart, Critical Role gains more than just a new system. They gain independence, creative freedom, and financial stability. It's a move that ensures that they control their narrative, their brand, and their future. And it just makes sense. Now, what do you think? Should Critical Role take the leap and adopt Daggerheart as their main system going forward? Or should they switch over to D&D 2024? Honestly, despite my previous argument, I can see it going either way. Now, while you wait for my next video, here's a few other videos that YouTube thinks you're gonna like.